All right, so are you ready to dive deep? Today we're tackling year million.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Right. Now, we're not talking about some, like, literal calendar date. Year million is how this National Geographic documentary frames it.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about this future where humans could, like, radically extend their lifespans, maybe even hit immortality.
Definitely a heady concept.
No kidding. And that's exactly what we're going to be unpacking today. The crazy science and what living in a world where, well, death isn't inevitable would actually look like. I mean, whoa.
Yeah, I think the doc does a really smart thing using year million like that. It's like a stand-in for a time when, how we think about aging and death could be totally, like, unrecognizable.
Totally. It makes you think, right? What if we were all living for hundreds of years, or like forever even? What would relationships be like? Work, our sense of purpose even.
Big questions for sure.
No kidding.
Hmm.
And the documentary goes deep on some wild scientific possibilities. But it starts with, like, how far we've already come. Life expectancy has basically doubled in the past 150 years, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, and it's mostly because of stuff like vaccines and, just basic hygiene getting better. We've gotten so much better at fighting
Yeah.
disease.
So now the documentary asks, okay, what if we push those boundaries even further? Like, what about nanotechnology? Imagine these microscopic robots in your blood fixing your cells from the inside out.
Yeah, like constantly repairing things at a molecular level.
Exactly. Reversing aging and treating diseases, like, before they even show up. I mean, it sounds like pure sci-fi, right?
Totally. The documentary actually points out, scientists are already doing incredible things with nanotech right now. It's not just fantasy.
Well, for sure. Like, what kinds of things?
Well, they're using it to make sure medications go exactly where they need to,
Yeah.
like chemotherapy that only targets cancer cells, so you get fewer side effects.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and even to just eliminate bad cells completely. So like a whole new way to attack diseases like cancer. It's still early days, but the potential is just, well, mind-boggling.
Okay, so huge potential, but also got to think about the downsides,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Like, what happens if those nanobots go haywire? Who controls how they're made and who gets them? Big questions we need to figure out as this tech keeps developing.
It's not just about what we could do, but, like, thinking about the consequences too. And the documentary doesn't shy away from that.
Nope, not at all. And they also get into genetic engineering. Like, imagine changing our DNA to totally eliminate diseases before they even start. Alzheimer's, gone.
Wow.
And even like choosing certain traits for future generations. The documentary makes a funny example about like getting rid of the gene for weak handshakes.
That's
But
good.
it shows how powerful this technology is. And yeah, maybe a little scary too.
It's fascinating, but it does feel like we're crossing some lines, you know?
Mm.
Like designing babies.
Hmm.
It's kind of unsettling.
It definitely brings up those ethical questions. Like, how much should we mess with future generations' DNA? What if we mess up diversity? And who gets to decide which traits are good or bad?
That's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, heavy stuff that scientists and ethicists are already arguing about.
And then, on top of all that, the documentary goes into mind uploading. This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Oh yeah, definitely one of the most like mind-bending ideas they explore. Imagine your consciousness, your memories, everything that makes you you, scanned and uploaded to a supercomputer.
So, like, basically you're living digitally even after your body's gone. It's Matrix level stuff.
It is, and the doc tries to break down how that might actually work. It's about this thing called brain emulation, where scientists would map out and then copy the entire network of neurons in your brain.
That sounds incredibly complex.
It is. But there are already projects, like the Human Connectome Project, working on mapping the brain in crazy detail. The goal is to, understand how it works so well that we could do this kind of emulation. But the documentary doesn't stop at the science.
Right, because even if you could copy your brain, is that copy really you?
Exactly. Like, would it have your consciousness, your feelings, your sense of self? What even does it mean to be human if you don't have a body?
Deep stuff.
And if you could copy yourself multiple times, would each copy be like its own person or just an extension of the original you? We're way beyond what we know now.
It's like we're talking about a whole new way of existing, where the line between life and death, even between real and virtual, gets totally blurry.
Yeah, and the documentary kind of throws this out there. It might not be as far off as we think.
This is both exciting and kind of scary.
Yeah.
Year million takes what we think is impossible and makes us face the fact that, maybe it's not that impossible after all.
Right. Like, what if this is our reality sooner than we imagine? It makes us think about what it would mean to live in a world where death isn't a given but a choice, and where what humans can do is basically limitless.
We've only just started to scratch the surface here, but next, we'll dive even deeper into what all this radical life extension could mean. How would it change our relationships, society? What does being human even mean in a world like that? Let's keep going. So we've covered nanobots, designer babies, mind uploading. It's a lot to take in, right?
It really is a bit overwhelming.
But the thing is, the documentary doesn't just like throw these ideas out there and leave us hanging. It tries to actually show us what life in year million could be like, especially for the people who decide to upload themselves into this thing called the Metaverse.
Right, right. The metaverse, they show it as like this total immersion digital world where, people can
Right.
live and interact and all that.
Okay, so in this year million world, we could be like living out our digital fantasies. It sounds pretty amazing, but also kind of freaky. What happens to our sense of reality if we're spending most of our time in a virtual world?
Yeah, that's a big one. And the doc does wrestle with that. They suggest that the metaverse in this future, it wouldn't just be about escaping reality. It could be a place for like deeper connection, for creativity even, and personal growth in ways we can't even imagine now.
Like what kind of growth?
Well, imagine being able to explore new worlds, right?
Hmm.
Connecting with people from anywhere in like super immersive ways, or even like changing your own virtual appearance at will. It's like the possibilities are just endless.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing. But
Yeah.
what about the people who don't upload? Like what happens to them in year million?
The documentary doesn't forget about them. It suggests life would be radically different even for the people who stay in the physical world. Imagine having centuries to really master a skill or explore your hobbies, just enjoying the world, really taking it all in.
So instead of racing against time, we'd have, like, all the time in the world. That would totally change our priorities and motivations. Would we even still want the same things if we had unlimited time?
That's a really interesting question. And yeah, the documentary, it touches on that. They explore the idea that, like, our values might shift dramatically in a world without death. Maybe material possessions and career stuff wouldn't be as important. Maybe it'd be more about personal growth, creative expression, making meaningful connections.
I guess we'd have to redefine what a good life even means. But the doc doesn't just focus on, like, the individual experience, right?
Yeah.
It gets into the bigger picture, like what would all this mean for society?
Exactly. And that's where things get even more, well, complicated. Like, what would happen to relationships if people were living for hundreds of years? Would marriages last? What would families even look like?
And what about work? Would people have tons of different careers over their super long lifespans? What would even make people want to work?
So many questions, right? The documentary really makes you think about how everything, all our social structures, would have to adapt.
And what about resources? Could the planet even handle a population that's like constantly growing because no one's dying of old age?
Yeah, that's a big one. And the documentary acknowledges that year million wouldn't be perfect. They talk about overpopulation, resources running out, even potential social unrest if we don't figure out some solutions.
So even if we figure out how to live forever, there'd be a whole bunch of new problems to deal with. And, these technologies, assuming they're even possible, they'd probably be super expensive.
Oh, for sure.
Wouldn't that just make things even more unequal, like a world where only rich people can afford to live forever?
That's a huge concern, and the documentary definitely brings it up. They talk about the potential for this divide between, the people who can access life extension tech and those who can't, making existing inequalities even worse.
It's kind of bleak, right? Like, as much as living forever sounds cool, it's not like it would magically solve all our problems.
Right. The documentary doesn't pretend it would be all sunshine and roses. They paint a more nuanced picture. Year Million isn't just about amazing technology, but also all the potential downsides and, ethical issues that come along with it.
It really makes you think, I mean, it's not just about science, but like, what does it even mean to be human in a world where death might not be a thing?
And it challenges us to like actively think about what kind of future we want,
Yeah.
right? If we can actually extend lifespans indefinitely, what kind of world do we want to live in? What values are most important?
That's a lot to wrap your head around. But I think that's the whole point, right? This deep dive, the whole documentary, it's about pushing us out of our comfort zones and making us face these big kind of existential questions.
Totally. Because whether year million happens in 1,000 years or 100, thinking about these things helps us understand ourselves better and the choices we're making right now.
So we've explored all the amazing possibilities and the potential issues of this year million future. But the documentary doesn't stop there. They also go into this concept of cryonics, which some people see as a kind of bridge to this future world.
Ah, yes, cryonics. That's the whole preserving bodies at super low temperatures thing, with the hope of, bringing them back someday when we figured out how to fix whatever killed them.
Like hitting pause on life and hoping to unpause it later when we have the tech to deal with aging and disease.
It's a wild idea. And the documentary even shares the story of a teenage girl, just 14, who fought a legal battle to be cryogenically preserved after she died. It's pretty heartbreaking, but it shows how complex this whole thing is.
Yeah, I remember that story.
Okay.
It makes you think about how far people are willing to go for a chance at a second life, even if it's uncertain. But it brings up so many questions, doesn't it? Like, is it right to cling to that hope if the technology might never work? Or if it does work, is it ethical to bring people back to a world they wouldn't even recognize?
Really tough ethical stuff. And of course, there are the practical hurdles too. Like, will this technology ever actually work? And if it does, how would these revived people fit into a future society that's totally different from what they knew? We don't have those answers yet.
So many unknowns. But clearly cryonics speaks to something deep in us, right? That desire to, like, cheat death, to have more life, to see what the future holds.
Absolutely. It gets at our deepest fears and hopes. I think that's why the documentary includes it as part of the year million conversation. It forces us to think about our own mortality and that maybe, just maybe, death isn't the end.
Even if year million never happens, thinking about it can change how we live right now.
Totally. It reminds us to appreciate time, to really enjoy our experiences, and to make the most of the life we have right here, right now.
It's kind of wild,
Yeah.
thinking about all this stuff. Nanobots, genetic engineering, mind uploading, even cryonics. It really makes you question what being human even means. Like, maybe year million isn't just about living longer, but like becoming something else entirely.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the documentary actually gets into that with this idea of transhumanism. It's a whole movement of people who think we should use technology to, like, enhance our abilities, our very nature even. Maybe even leading to a post-human species.
Post-human, okay, wow, that sounds intense. What does that even mean?
Well, think of it this way. Transhumanism is like the in-between stage. Using technology to overcome our limits, right? Whether it's, changing our genes, adding cybernetic parts, or even merging with AI. But post-humanism, that's the final stage, I guess, where we've gone beyond what we even consider human right now.
So like they'd still be from humans, but they'd be so different they're not really human anymore.
Right. It could be like those uploaded minds in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Or people with augmented bodies, like way beyond what we can do now, or some mix of both.
Whoa. And that opens up a whole other can of worms, right? Like, what does that mean for being a person? For rights? Responsibilities? Would we even consider them human anymore? How would they interact with the people who didn't change?
It's a lot to think about. And yeah, the documentary admits that. They don't give easy answers, but they do show a lot of different viewpoints. Some people are all for this stuff. Like, it's the next step in evolution, right? Others are, well, more cautious, worried about the risks and, the ethics of it all.
It's a debate that's only going to get bigger as this tech gets more advanced and more people can access it. We need to be talking about this stuff now before it's too late.
Definitely. The documentary does a good job of, like, presenting those tough questions. They've got scientists, futurists, philosophers, even just regular people all trying to wrap their heads around what year million could mean. And it's a reminder that this stuff, it wouldn't just affect a few people. It could change everything about being human.
So big picture, as we're finishing up our deep dive into year million, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the most important thing is the future isn't set in stone. It's like we get to decide what it looks like, whether we crack immortality, upload our minds, or just keep pushing the boundaries of what humans can do. It's up to us.
That's both exciting and a little scary. We have the power to shape the future, but that means we got to be responsible too.
Exactly. And that's why we need these conversations. We need to question everything, to really think about the long-term consequences of what we do. We have to make sure these advancements benefit everyone, that they help us create a better, more just world.
It's a call to action, to learn about this stuff, to get involved, to really consider the choices we're making, both as individuals and as a society.
That's it. And even if year million is, just a thought experiment, exploring these ideas can change how we live right now.
Absolutely. Makes you appreciate the present moment even more.
Totally. Makes you want to, like, savor your experiences, make the most of every day.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've got to leave year million behind for now and come back to the present. But let's keep these ideas with us. Keep exploring the big questions. And let's work towards a future that's both, advanced and deeply human.
Couldn't agree more. It's been great exploring all this with you.
Likewise. And a huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this amazing deep dive into year million. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the world around us, so stay tuned.